folks, gather round while I elucidate about a swing bird not far from the gates, run by a cat by the name of Will, and everyone calls him Will the Thrill. Now this cat Will is a big-neck king with a leopard fez and a diamond ring, and a tiki goddess who looks to kill.
Welcome everybody to Cult Status Special Halloween Edition. We've been doing these all month long, bringing in special guests, talking about their careers, and discussing what their choices are for this Halloween. I'm with Will the Thrill Viharo this week. How are you doing, Will?
All right, how you doing, man?
Did I say your last name right?
Viharo, that's correct.
All right. You never know. You know what, that awkward moment's like, yeah, you said that completely wrong. I have to fix it for you.
I'm used to that, man. I've gotten mail that said Will Vihard on it, so as long as you didn't call me Will Vihard.
Yeah, that'd be awkward the whole time, just like, I gotta stop you there. That's getting weird.
Yeah, I get Viharo or, Viharo. Yeah, you nailed it.
So you recently moved from the Bay Area up to Seattle,
Yep.
and I know you have like a kind of a thing going on with your Thrillville. Do you plan on continuing that in Seattle?
Oh, no. You mean Thrillville Theater? Yeah, that's that's probably where you know me from. The show I hosted in the Bay Area for, 17 years? More or less. 12 years at the Parkway, which closed, and then was on the road for a while, and then it was a Forbidden Island movie Tiki night, movie night at Forbidden Island Tiki Lounge. I don't know if you were ever there. And then it was at the New Parkway kind of franchise with guest hosts. But when I got up here, I met with some people at SIFF, the Seattle International Film Festival, and they floated some interest, but we kind of agreed that it's, that kind of old school horror host stuff that I specialized in, although I wasn't really a horror host because I was all over the map with the movies, it's cult movies from a certain era, 50s, 60s, 70s, some 80s. But they agreed that, they want to appeal to a different audience, and Thrillville was kind of slowing down in the Bay Area the last few years, so it kind of was running on fumes anyway, and so I moved on, and Thrillville is more or less the platform for my Pulp Fiction now, so that's kind of where I'm at. So I came up to rainy Seattle to hole up and write.
And you just told me you're finishing your next Vic Valentine book, correct?
Yeah, the first one, Love Stories Are Too Violent for Me, which came out almost 20 years ago, and it was reissued by Gutter Books last year with Christian Slater on the cover as Vic Valentine, because that movie's been in development forever, and fortunately he just got another TV show. So that's on the back burner. But anyway, yeah, this is the sixth one, Hard Boiled Heart, set here in Seattle, and it's all the other books were written in the 90s. So this is Vic, like me, 20 years later, and he's up here in Seattle, and I don't want to give too much away, but it's going really well. I've already got some cover art by Scooter Harris, who's an artist for Bachelor Pad magazine, for which I write a movie column.
And you do that every month, right?
Gutter Books. Hopefully, Gutter Books will put it out. Hopefully, sometime next year.
Now, all 7 books in the series are available, correct?
This will be the 6th one. Yeah.
Six.
Love Stories Are Too Violent for Me is a standalone, and then Fate Is My Pimp is published with Romance Takes a Rain Check as kind of a double bill, and then I Lost My Heart in Hollywood and Diary of a Dick are also a quote double bill. 2 in 1. So they're all on Amazon.
And are they all? They're now on Kindle too, is correct?
All the books are available in several formats. There's like 10 of them now out there. There's some Vic Valentine, and then there's my favorite, A Mermaid Drowns in the Midnight Lounge, which is the one I wrote after I'd been a programmer for 12 years and doing Thrillville. My brain had been totally warped. So yeah, they're all out there. Freaks That Carry Your Luggage Up to the Room. It came from Hangar 18, which I was commissioned to write by Scott Fulks, who I met at a scientist I met at Forbidden Island. Lavender Blonde, my first novel, Chumpy Walnut, about a guy only a foot tall. That's the only family-friendly one, really. Down a Dark Alley, my crime novel from years ago. So yeah, it's they're all out there, man, in various formats. Lavender Blonde and Down a Dark Alley are also on iTunes, but they're all in print and Kindle.
iTunes. I didn't know iTunes was doing books.
Yeah, a couple of them are on. You can download off iBooks.
Okay, for a second I thought you were telling me that you did. Do you have any that are like books on CD? Or not CD? I guess that's kind of past.
But I don't get the sound of my own voice, so I don't. I've done podcasts, but I'd rather just write. So no, I have. My wife's got a great voice. She could maybe do a sexy reading of some of my books, but
Maybe you could do
because
it
she's
like
an actress.
yeah, maybe you could do it as like a radio play, like old school radio play. Have a bunch of people come in and do voice work over it.
I've had the radio plays adapted from my work over the years at KPFA in Berkeley a couple times, which came off pretty well. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm open to anything, any medium.
Are those radio plays still available?
I've got them up on SoundCloud. Is that what it's called, SoundCloud?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I've got Neon Rose, which is a chapter from an unpublished novel of mine, was read on the air with Beatles music, strangely enough. That's up there. And then there's a radio play adapted from an unpublished novella of mine called Shadow Music from 1996 that, is a nice little production with sound effects and music and everything and a few actors. So they're both up on SoundCloud.
You got to send me a link to that. I want to hear those. That sounds awesome.
No, I will.
I'm a big fan of like the old Shadow and like that kind of like radio play. It's
well, those pieces are from when I was kind of in my literary period. I mean, I'm known as a pulp guy now because I've kind of just settled on. I don't know if pulp's really genre because it's several genres, and I've been blending genres for a while now. So I'm not really a crime guy or noir guy or a horror guy. I'm just kind of a pulp guy. But those pieces are when I was trying to be a literary guy, and I don't know. I'm not really the literary type, I guess.
Well, I guess by not sticking to a particular subgenre, it gives you freedom to bounce around whichever direction you feel instead of forcing yourself to stay in a certain direction.
True, it gives me creative freedom, but it's tough to market. I've had a lot of close calls with big publishers over the years. Judith Regan was the biggest one 20 years ago. It's hard to pigeonhole my stuff, which makes it hard to market for publishers. So most of my stuff is self-published, but I have my Thrillville platform. And there's so much self-publishing now, and even all these little magazines and anthologies coming out, a lot of them are just publishing through Lulu and CreateSpace, so they're basically self-publishing too. So that's just the market now. It's wide open, but it's also there's kind of a glut, so it's hard to stand out. So fortunately, this editor, Craig T. McNeely of this new magazine, Dark Corners, he dubbed me Will Viharo, unsung hero of the pulps, because he says there's no one else like me. So if nothing else, I think my stuff is different than anything else you'll find out there. You just got to find it.
Yeah, speaking of unusual, you have your documentary. Well, it's not your documentary, but it's a documentary about you.
Yeah, The Thrill Is Gone by Jeff M. Giordano. He approached me a little while before I was going to leave the Bay Area because I've been, I've been talking about leaving the Bay Area for like 2 years. I finally made it happen because my wife Monica got into the University of Washington School of Drama PhD program, so that enabled us to come up here. Sold our condo in Alameda. But anyway, the rumors were circulating I was leaving, and remember I had Thrillville kind of franchised out at the New Parkway. And I had guest hosts like Lord Blood Raw and Queen of Trash and Queen of Scream, and The Undertaker, Misery and Mayhem. So anyway, but I was programming, but I was having other people host it. But every now and then I would host one. So I was hosting my final Shatfest, my annual tribute to William Shatner, and then my 17th anniversary / farewell Bay Area show. So Jeff, whom I met at Forbidden Island, who's a filmmaker from New Jersey. He's a Jersey boy like me. So that he wanted to document my farewell performances and interview the fans, if you will, who I call thrill seekers. And so he put all this together. He shot a lot of footage, and he's actually it's on YouTube. The Thrill Is Gone, but he did another cut called the Director's Cut, which is longer, that he's premiering at the Alameda Library on November. I think it's Monday the 11th. At 5:30 p.m. for free, and we're going to be selling those off our website soon. But it's pretty cool. I mean, it's kind of a comprehensive documentary because the footage is new, but he inserts a lot of photographs and some old B movie trailers, which is fun. But he covers kind of my career in the Bay Area as a film programmer and impresario, but also my writing, which is really cool. So most of it was shot at the New Parkway and also at Forbidden Island. The interviews. So yeah, it's free on YouTube.
Well, that's great. And I'll have to admit, I have never been to the show. In fact, I had been told about you through Mr. Lobo years ago when I was working on my trash cinema book. And that's how we started discussing, because you would book. I was trying to do a film festival, and I was way over my head. I had no idea what I was doing. So he suggested I talk to you, and that's how we got to know each other. In fact,
that's a while ago. It seems like.
Yeah, it was 2007. I've never actually published it. I've had it sitting there rotting for years.
Yeah, that was a year before. see, the Parkway closed in 2009 suddenly on 4 days' notice, which created a lot of drama. But there was a lot of internal drama that led to that. But the community was mourning it for years until the new Parkway opened. But yeah, Lobo, he was a frequent guest at Thrillville, man. So we had a lot of fun times. Thrillville was quite the nexus for a lot of those guys, a lot of surf bands, burlesque troops, and horror hosts.
And is Will the Thrill? Is it a character, or were you just being yourself?
Well, I started out. I mean, I was asked to do it. Actually, the Parkway opened in January '97. I mean, in its form, that it says a speakeasy with couches and pizza and beer and food. It's open in January of '97. It's an old Art Deco theater that's had many incarnations. In fact, it was a gangbanger nightclub right before it opened.
Whoa.
But that's why they had to make it 21 and over, because the neighborhood council didn't want it reopened at all, because there'd been a shooting there and everything. We were going to serve beer, so that's kind of how they kind of placated it by making it an adults-only theater. Anyway, so I was friends with the owners and for years, and they actually asked me to create and host and produce and program a weekly live show with a movie. So, which was called the Midnight Lounge at first, and my first lovely assistant was my first wife of about, that only lasted about 2 months. She was in AA, and we were serving beer, and we had a lot of problems, so it didn't last. So anyway, I was pulling lovely assistants out of the audience, kind of auditioning new lovely assistants, and then new wives turned out, because Monica became known as the Tiki Goddess, showed up one night when I showed Jailhouse Rock. So anyway, it was the Midnight Lounge for a couple of years, and thing is, the people who opened the Parkway had published the first edition of Love Stories That Do Violent for Me. They had a small press called Wildcard Press, and they published that edition. And then they actually asked me to do this show to kind of promote it. So they figured if I became a kind of a local personality, that would help promote the book. And it kind of did, but it became Thrillville in January of '99. I moved to Thursday nights, and I redid it at Thrillville Theater. And it did much better in that time slot. But anyway, but kind of Will the Thrill was my persona. That it was kind of inspired by the original Nutty Professor with Jerry Lewis, the Buddy Love character.
Yeah.
This lounge lizard, because I was in the whole lounge scene, and I was into all this stuff before it became churny. But at the time in the '90s, because of Pulp Fiction and Swingers and all these movies, the whole lounge tiki scene was really trendy, and so I kind of exploited that, but it was a combination of who I was, who I wanted to be. I was kind of like a doppelganger, like a fantasy doppelganger. So I guess I'm somewhere in between Will the Thrill and Vic Valentine in real life. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of both, but neither. But as I went on, I got lazier, and it was kind of an exaggerated version of myself. It really depended on what mood I was in any particular night, and and then I adopted the Fez. So now that I've retired the Fez, it really feels like a character. Like, I don't feel like that guy at all anymore. So I look at pictures and I think, what a clown. So, but it had its own following, and it served its purpose, and it gave me my public platform, which I'm using now to promote my fiction, which was my original dream, which I went back to after the Parkway closed. So it kind of came full circle, and then so I don't know. Will the Thrill I'm more Will the Chill these days.
Yeah. So I mean, that's probably the only time that you've ever acted. You come from like a circle of like it's kind of like in your bloodline acting. Like your dad probably, he did like every TV show imaginable.
Yeah. Actually, I'm Will the Quill. I'm a writer. I could have been an actor. Could have been a contender.
What was it about that choice that you made between going from not doing acting but being a writer?
Acting was never on the table. I mean, I was on my own when I was 16 in LA, and I it's a long story, but I went out, I got kicked out of New Jersey, lived with my father, who's an actor, and then we didn't get along, so I was on my own, and I ran up hooking up with Mickey Rourke, who was a friend of my dad's, and he was just getting famous. So if I wanted to be an actor, I had a golden opportunity. I just didn't have the bug. I mean, I wanted to be a writer since I was a teenager. I mean, originally a comic strip artist, actually. Chumpy Walnut was originally a talking walnut in a comic strip, and I didn't think I was a good enough illustrator, so I decided to make him a human character in a novel. And I'd already written a draft of Chumpy Walnut by the time I met Mickey, and it was just been my dream ever since I can remember, man. I just never wanted to be an actor, and like my dad was an actor. He was in a lot of movies, Valley of the Dolls, Via Rides with Yul Brynner and Charles Bronson and Robert Mitchum. He was in Hide in Plain Sight with James Caan. He was in a lot of TV shows playing either bad guys or crazy cops. Starsky and Hutch, Kojak, Beretta, all those shows,
Yeah,
Mod Squad,
I think my favorite one.
18. So anyway, I had the opportunity. I just didn't have the bug. I mean, Mickey even took me to audition for Rumblefish for Francis Coppola, and I screwed it up. I don't know. I'm not an actor. And so the whole Will the Thrill thing was ironic because I never considered myself a performer anyway. I just got asked to do this, and I could improvise on stage, but I couldn't remember a line to save my life. Like, Mr. Lobo does skits, and so he'd get up there and he'd want to do a skit, and I cannot remember anything. I'm good at riffing and improvising.
I took acting class. My degree is in theater, and my acting classes, like when it came to just making stuff up, it was completely fine. But I accidentally ended up being the lead in a play because I was the understudy for my. I had to be an understudy for my scholarship, or at least some sort of part in the play. And I was like, oh, this guy's got it. He's been doing this for like 3 years. He's like the best guy we have. He suddenly just decided to quit college and move to LA, and I ended up being the lead. And it scared me so bad because I kept seeing page after page of monologues, and I got the worst memory. It was ridiculous. I see where you're coming from because I'd rather just wing it than stick to the plan.
Well, I mean, Monica is an actress. I mean, she's going for her PhD in theater right now, too, actually, at the University of Washington. But she's an actor and a natural performer. She's actually really shy in person until you get to know her, which is ironic. I guess I could do it because I didn't really care about it that much. It wasn't important to me. So I don't know if that sounds right, but I could do it because there wasn't really anything at stake. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I had the gig. It was something I created myself. There wasn't really a lot of pressure. The only pressure was to get audiences, in the seats, because I was also the programmer for the theater. So I had to make sure everything was cost effective. And back in the day, I was booking 35 millimeter prints, which was sometimes hard to obtain. So there's a lot of drama and politics just getting the prints and the rights and stuff like that. And then making sure they showed up on time and trying to do a balance between things things people were comfortable with, had already seen, would want pay to see again, and then introducing them to new things. So thankfully Thrillville came along right at that kind of like twilight period between the end of 35 millimeter film and the digital era, when people were still kind of looking to movie theaters to discover new things. So they're still willing to go out and have a community experience and see an old grindhouse flick in 35 millimeter with a beer and a pizza. And those days are kind of behind us now. I mean, that business model is it's evolving, is what's happening.
Yeah, it's still really big in Portland. At least the last time I lived here, and I'm assuming Seattle and Portland are kind of like simpatico in that kind of concept.
Yeah. I love McMenamin's Change. In fact, the owners of the Speakeasy Theaters did a lot of reconnaissance up in Portland. And we were down there. We stayed at the Kennedy School, which was awesome, which is the McMenamin's tells us how to do it right, because they have cheap prices. They're really creative with the venues. Like Kennedy is a renovated school. So they do it right. That's why they're thriving. Also, the Alamo Draft House, they know how to do it. I mean, the Parkway was frankly mismanaged, which is too bad. I don't want to talk too much about it. It's kind of a sore spot with me. But, it's not really where my destiny ultimately lied anyway. But I enjoyed it while it was there. And, but yeah, Portland does it right, man.
I guess this is the perfect time. You were choosing movies for the Parkway. I guess it's time to go through our list of Halloween movies.
Okay, so how many do you want? 10?
Top 10.
Okay, well, I just posted my top 50 horror movies on my blog at Thrillville.net, but we're not going to do all those. So my number one is always I Was a Teenage Werewolf from 1957, and that's really a very sentimental choice because I grew up watching it on Doc Shock's Mad Theater and Horror Theater on Channel 17 out of Philly when I was raised in South Jersey. So that's where I discovered it in the early 70s. Usually paired it with I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, which is another favorite of mine. And these movies are from American International Pictures, which revolutionized the drive-in in 1957, with the double bill of I Was a Teenage Werewolf and Invasion of the Saucer Men, which is another favorite of mine. So I Was a Teenage Werewolf captivated me because, I was a lonely, isolated kid in New Jersey, and Michael Landon plays this kind of troubled teenager, Tony Rivers, and he gets hypnotized by a local shrink played by Whit Bissell, who was in a lot of 50s horror movies, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Creature from the Black Lagoon. You'd recognize me if you saw him. So anyway, it's kind of like it's a weird hybrid of mad scientists and horror and the JD genres, and they really AFP was brilliant at capitalizing on those elements, and they were the kings of the drive-in for the 50s, 60s, into the 70s because along with all the teenage monster movies, which is a genre they created long before Buffy and all that. They did all the Beach Party movies and the Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies, and then they got into the biker and druggy movies in the '60s and the blaxploitation in the '70s. So they were the kings of exploitation, and one of my favorite studios. And when I first started booking Thrillville, when it was the Midnight Lounge, Kit Parker was a distributor, and they had a lot of their prints. So right away I started booking. I couldn't find a 35 millimeter print of Teenage Werewolf, but I think I booked Teenage Frankenstein, Blood of Dracula, which is the female vampire version. How to Make a Monster, where Teenage Frankenstein kind of meets Teenage Werewolf. The She Creature that Conquered the World, Amazing Colossal Man, all those. And then a lot of their 60s stuff like The Trip and Wild on the Streets. And then their blaxploitation stuff, I think Coffee was AIP Coffee. And anyway, Foxy Brown with Pam Grier. So anyway, AIP still is I'd say is my favorite movie studio. So I Was a Teenage Werewolf was kind of their first big movie, put them on the map.
Yeah, it's nice to see.
And I love the feel of it. It has kind of a noir feel. I mean, speaking of genre hybrids, it was directed by Gene Fellow Jr., who was an editor for Fritz Lang, and it was shot by what's his name, Joseph Lachelle, who shot the classic film noir Laura. And the music by Paul Dunlap I really love. Maybe you can play that later, because I gave you kind of a bootleg of the main title theme, which has never been formally released. But it's just really moody. I like the mood of it.
How did you feel when Teen Wolf came out? Did you feel like it was a ripoff of it?
85. Yeah, I mean, of course, Teen Wolf. Of course, it was. I mean, now if you say Teenage Werewolf, it's never been released on DVD. It was on video 20 years ago, briefly from Columbia. But Susan Nicholson, James Nicholson, is the producer's widow, sitting on the rights for some reason. And I had a 16 millimeter print I was going to show up at Copia in Napa, your old stomping grounds. And then I got shaken down by her lawyer husband a week before the show. She took the print, and I never got to show it. But so it's been kind of out of circulation for a long time. A lot of people don't know it. So when you say Teenage Werewolf, most kids will, if they think that's old now too, they'll think of Michael Fox rather than Michael Landon.
Yeah, it's weird. I remember when Michael Landon tried to do Teen Wolf, or I Was a Teenage Werewolf homage on Highway to Heaven.
Yeah, I was a middle-aged werewolf. That's on YouTube. So.
And my mom told me what it was, and I was like, I had no reference point to the joke, and she was like, okay, we got to go get this movie. We found it at the library, and that's one of the very first horror movies I've ever seen. I think the only thing I'd ever seen before that was Critters, so that's probably my second or third horror movie.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I mean, like I said, my favorites are very sentimental and personal to me, although my next favorite is Dawn of the Dead, which is considered a masterpiece by many genre fans. But even that, I first saw that when I first got to LA in '79 when I was on my own. I was 16, and I was free to go to movies. I didn't have my wicked stepmother, grounding me all the time and keeping me indoors. So I went to movies all the time because I could. There was no supervision, and I got a job as a busboy, so I had my own money. So anyway, I saw Dawn of the Dead in '79. It had been out for a while, but it was at this theater in Westwood, and I saw it every night for like a week, and it freaked the hell out of me. But man, I had nightmares, and I was obsessed with it. Now I just think it's hilarious. It's still one of my favorites, but I'm older and cynical now. But the music by Goblin, I think, is the definitive zombie music, and it's a masterpiece of the genre. George Romero, as reinvented the zombie in the '60s with Night of the Living Dead, and he created the whole genre. And the poor guy doesn't get a penny off of it. And it's a multimedia pop culture phenomenon now, and he doesn't get enough respect. I mean, the remake of Dawn of the Dead, Zack Snyder's remake, I thought was okay. It was a good action movie. I don't know if I can call it a horror movie.
I think it's more action.
Yeah, I mean, it was okay. I mean, it was kind of pointless. I mean, it was fine. I don't hate it. But to me, the social commentary, the apocalyptic atmosphere, the acting, the originality of it, everything. The first Dawn of the Dead, the only Dawn of the Dead to me is it's a masterpiece. So I'd put that in at number 2.
I have to admit to this, it's a little embarrassing that I've only seen Dawn of the Dead once, and it's because it haunted me so bad. I mean, it haunted me for years. Literally, there was a point where I was working in a gas station out in the middle of nowhere right after I saw it. And this is like when I was 17. And I started contemplating, hey, how would I hide in here if there was ever a zombie attack? That's the kind of damage it did to me mentally. I still haven't really been able to watch it again.
Well, you watch it again, you'll just laugh. It's funny, man. But I mean, I think so. I mean, Romero intended it as a black comedy. I love Day of the Dead too. That's another one I favor from '85. I mean, Night, Dawn, and Day are the big three of zombie movies. Day of the Dead is also it's bleaker and more claustrophobic, and the makeup is much better. But Tom Savini did the makeup, and then young Greg Nicotero was also in the movie. And another great score by John Harrison. But Day of the Dead is just as good to me as Dawn of the Dead. It's just not as iconic. And I saw that at a Grindhouse Theater on Market Street in San Francisco when it came out in '85, which was with a bunch of drunks. It was, talking about scary. And I was living in a cheap hotel in North Beach. So, yeah, it's kind of traumatizing. But, I went back for more. So,
Oh, I had
yeah,
that.
I mean, Night, Dawn, and Day they're essential Halloween. All three of those are. I did all three of them just the other night, so that's a good night of Halloween movie watching.
How do you feel about Return of the Living Dead?
I love it. I love Return of the Living Dead. In fact, but that came out the same year as my third favorite movie, which is Reanimator. So 1985 was a good year for zombies because you had Day of the Dead, Return of the Living Dead, which was a hilarious spoof, and then you've got Reanimator, which to me was an EC comic come to life. I mean, it was so lurid because I love lurid. And Stuart Gordon actually went there, if you know what I mean. I mean, have you seen Reanimator?
Yes.
Yeah, you know the scene I'm talking about. I mean, I remember seeing it, thinking he's not going to go there. He's not going to go there. Oh my God, he went there, and the audience just freaked out. Some people got up and left. You know the scene with Barbara Crampton, and the head scene, we'll call it.
Oh yes.
Yeah, but but I love it. It's so funny, and and I love the visuals. It really looks like an EC comic come to life, and the gallows humor, and that's definitely one of my all-time favorites, Reanimator. So that's I'm gonna watch that again probably sometime before Halloween for sure.
The funny thing is, I think every movie you've mentioned so far. Well, you've only mentioned three. I guess the last two they're up on Hulu right now. So if nobody's ever seen them, just hop on there. They're playing right now.
Dawn of the Dead's on Hulu.
Sorry, Day of the Dead. I'm sorry, Day of the Dead is added.
Yeah. Well, all of those, like Dawn of the Dead, poor Romero doesn't own the rights to his first three big zombie movies because Night of the Living Dead, I don't know you know the story, but they released it without the copyright on the print, so it was immediately public domain because they changed the title.
Right.
He had a title, and the distributor changed it to Night of the Living Dead, which is a good title, but they left the copyright off. And then Dawn of the Dead, Richard Rubenstein, the producer, owns the rights, and he's been sitting on them, and that's why I could never show that in Thrillville. He won't allow theatrical exhibition of it, which is really stupid. I mean, it's on Blu-ray. I have the Blu-ray, which looks great. And rumor is he's been trying to make a 3D conversion of it for years, which is, again, pointless. I mean, these people and Susan Nicholson with I Was a Teenage Werewolf, they're really overestimating the popularity of even these famous films because generations come and go and kids don't care about movies made before last week, much less in the 50s and 70s. So the thing, they should keep these things out there any way they can, and they should thank anyone who wants to show them rather than sue them.
Right. And half the time people just want to just download it for free.
That's what's going on because it's going to get bootlegged anyway. So you might as well license it and make a little money off of it because it's going to, if people want to see it, they're going to find a way to see it. So.
All right,
there you go. So, you want to keep going?
Yep, number 4.
The Howling.
Yes.
1981, my favorite werewolf movie. Next time I Was a Teenage Werewolf, but The Howling really is the greatest werewolf movie ever made to me. I mean, it's director Joe Dante. He poured in all these great tributes to classic werewolf movies, and Roger Corman has a cameo in a phone booth, and again, it's got a really sexy scene by the campfire. That werewolf mating scene by the campfire is one of my favorite scenes. So definitely The Howling. And Rick Baker did the transformation scenes the same year as American Werewolf in London came out, which was also a landmark werewolf film, which I also love. I like The Howling more just because, again, it's more lurid. It's more of an exploitation movie because it's got the nudity and the sex, and also the humor is different. I mean, American Werewolf in London is funny, and it also has great horror. American Werewolf in London has just The Howling, but The Howling just has this kind of like satirical just attitude that appeals to me. This kind of black comedy, like Reanimator.
Yeah, the book is so different. I read the book actually first. I found it for in a quarter bin, and I had read it, and then I saw the movie immediately afterwards, and they're so different. I was like, what happened?
Well, same with Stuart Gordon in Reanimator, and that's allegedly based on a story by H.P. Lovecraft, and I think he takes a little bit of it, but it's really a Stuart Gordon movie. I mean, just like The Howling's a Joe Dante werewolf movie.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the sequel's just so pale in comparison. I never understood why it is Avco Embassy didn't continue with the sequels that someone else took over. It never made any sense to me.
A lot of things Hollywood do don't make sense to me, so don't ask me, man. I mean, especially as a film programmer for many years, a lot of their practices, just with distribution, make no sense to me at all.
Yeah, it just seemed like a franchise that was severely mishandled because the diminishing returns. By the time you get to like 6 and 7, you're like, oh, these aren't even films anymore. I don't even know what this is.
It took a dive with number two, which has some appeal because you got Christopher Lee and you've got Sybil Danning, taking off her top. But other than that, man, it's like, what happened? I mean, they completely blow it. But that's okay. The Howling itself is a standalone classic, so
right.
I don't even think about the sequels. So neither should you.
Yeah, I think. With the budget of American Werewolf in London, I think a lot of people notice that more. The Howling is, like you said, it's a very tight budget, kind of a driving
American
movie.
Werewolf in London was pretty much an A-list movie because you've got John Landis, and had more distribution, and it's still a great movie too.
Yeah, but I feel like The Howling is underrated in comparison.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I think because it's a little edgier, and a lot of people that just scares people off more than the horror is. It's a little edgier.
In my mind, the Ultimate Werewolf, like the look of the Ultimate Werewolf, is what. Did you say Rick Baker? For some reason, I thought it was Rob Bottin that created it.
On the Howling,
yeah.
Rick Baker had something to do with it. Huh. I'm pretty sure.
But Rob Bottin, his look and design of it is exactly in my head the perfect look of the werewolf. It's as if they took Werewolf by Night, that character, and brought him as close as possible to reality.
Yeah, there's no question. Oh, he was considered a makeup effects consultant on The Howling. Okay. He was also American Werewolf. I know it had something to do with it, but yeah, you're right. So yeah, definitely the transformation scene. Both those transformation scenes in American Werewolf and The Howling were transformative in themselves. I mean, they were definitely kind of took the genre to another level.
Right.
The same way Night of the Living Dead, rebooted the zombie. So
I think it's literally the first time they ever used bladder effects.
I think so too. Yeah, there hadn't been a lot of werewolf movies like in the 70s. Like the last big werewolf movie before that, if you don't count Werewolf of Washington with Dean Stockwell, which I don't think anyone does, although that's a funny movie. There's Curse of the Werewolf with Oliver Reed, the Hammer film from '61. But the werewolves kind of fell out of favor for about 20 years until The Howling kind of rebooted them.
Yeah, and then like every few years there'd be like at least some sort of movie with some sort of transformation. I remember Manimal.
Yeah. I should mention Paul Naschy, though, the Spanish forest guy.
Oh, that's right.
Werewolf movies, which I love. I love those. But they were mainly grindhouse, drive-in movies that not the mainstream kind of ignored. But those are classics. I love the Paul Naschy werewolf movies.
Yeah, I've never seen one, and I did a previous episode a month ago where someone, he's a horror host, and he was telling me I must watch at least a few of them just to get the experience.
I showed a 35 print of Werewolf versus the Vampire Woman, which is probably the most famous one, which I'm sure is on YouTube. Most of them are on YouTube. I think you can find the uncut version of Werewolf versus Dr. Jekyll on YouTube, which is great. That's one of my favorites too.
Good.
So yeah, I love werewolves and zombies, and so I should mention also. Fulci's Zombie from 1979, which was distributed as a sequel to Dawn of the Dead in Europe. But that really the makeup effects and the gore in that were really, really revolutionary. I mean, even more so than Dawn of the Dead. I mean, they were way over the top because there's kind of an outgrowth of the Italian cannibal craze from the late 70s. So they kind of just brought in zombies. So Zombie, also known as Zombie 2 from '79, and also has a great soundtrack by oh God, what's his name? Fabio Frizzi or something, or I don't know. I'll look it up. Fabio Frizzi. Yeah. Anyway, so that's another definitive zombie movie is Zombie from 1979.
All right, number 5.
Let me look at my list. Well, Creature from the Black Lagoon, which, I mean, it's kind of one of those, it could be a science fiction movie, it could be a horror movie, but because the creature is considered one of the, classic Universal monsters, I usually just lump it in with horror. But yeah, that's my favorite monster. I mean, the Creature from the Black Lagoon. That's pretty much everyone's favorite monster. I ain't saying that, but he's just so cool. He's just a cool design, and they haven't remade it. Guillermo del Toro was going to do it for a while, and John Landis was going to do it, I think, in the 70s, and I mean in the 80s, and I don't know about Spielberg, but a bunch of people toyed with the idea, and they haven't been able to get it off the ground. But you can't mess with that suit design, man. I mean, it's just classic. And it was created by a woman. I can't think of her name. The actual designer of the Gill Man.
Yeah, if you look at the quality of special effects back then escalated once they did that costume. There's nothing like it back then.
No, no, it was genius, man. It was just it's so sleek and cool, and I love the sequels too. Revenge of the Creature, where he goes to Florida, and then Creature Walks Among Us, where they shave his gills off, and he's in the loose in Sausalito in the Bay Area. So I don't know, I don't know how he got up there, but so yeah, I love all three. That's one of my favorite trilogies of all time is the Gilman trilogy. So definitely all three of those would be great Halloween viewing.
Yeah, beyond that trilogy, he's only ever shown up in Monster Squad, and they had to license the rights
Well,
for that one.
yeah, they didn't really, but he looks different. They couldn't really. Well, the thing about Frankenstein and Dracula are public domain, and so's werewolves and the Mummy. So, but when they got to the creature, yeah, whenever you've seen the creature pop up since then in various movies, uh, they couldn't really. He didn't look like the Gill Man. I mean, he showed up on the Monsters once, but that's Universal.
Yeah.
He was Uncle Gill. But you've had like Mexican creature movies, and you've had the She Creature, which is a great movie from AIP from '57, suit created by Paul Blaisdell. You have the Monster of Piedras Blancas from '59, which is I don't think that was Blaisdell. But that's another great suit that's kind of inspired by the creature. But people did a lot of lagoon monsters or there's humanoids from the deep from 81, which is kind of like it's what happens when the Gill Man goes into the cave with the girl. You actually get to see what happens. That was the whole concept behind that. But yeah, they couldn't replicate that design. Just like with Universal's Frankenstein, if you notice, they couldn't really do the flathead look. I mean, like when Hammer did Curse of Frankenstein in '57, or in the same year AIP did Teenage Frankenstein. They just came out with their own makeup. They had to do their own. The name Frankenstein is public domain, but the makeup was trademarked by Universal. Same with the Gill Man.
Number 6.
Oh, let me look at my list because now I'm drawing a blank. What did I put for number 6 on my list? Let me look. Hang on. Number 6 I've got here out of 50. Although after the first 5, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which has I picked that because it has all the Universal monsters in it, and that's actually a great monster movie. It's not just a great comedy. I mean, I think it's Bud and Lou's funniest movie, but it's also one of the best of the. I think it's best of the 3 Universal monster rallies. Before that, you had a House of Frankenstein, which was the first time that they had the Wolfman, Dracula, played by John Carradine, and the Frankenstein monster, played by Glenn Strange, together in one movie, although they didn't really have many scenes together, or any scenes together, really.
Huh.
And House of Dracula barely had the Wolfman in it. It had Frankenstein at the very end, just like House of Frankenstein. Dracula's in it a little bit more because he's in the title, but it's mainly about a mad doctor who contracts Dracula's blood and kind of goes on a killing spree. But they were all in the same movie. So when you got to Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in '48, there was more interplay. I mean, it was only the second time Bela Lugosi ever played Dracula. I mean, the second and only other time besides the original 1931 Dracula that you saw Bela Lugosi as Dracula. So that was great. And then he had Lon Chaney Jr. back for I think his 5th time as the Wolfman, and then you had Glenn Strange returning as the Frankenstein monster. Yeah, that just has all the elements, and I think that's the It's a Wonderful Life of Halloween movies. Like that's the one you go to every year. I think if there's an equivalent of It's a Wonderful Life for Halloween, I would say it's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
I forgot that's another one of those very, very early movies that I saw as a kid. They used to play like in the afternoon. You remember when TV used to actually play reruns of movies and TV shows during the afternoon instead of like paid commercials?
Yeah.
I remember during Halloween they were playing. I think they showed more. Isn't there an Abbott Costello Meets the Mummy and stuff like that?
They met all the monsters.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was one of the very first ones I saw as well. Huh.
Yeah, what made Frankenstein is definitely the funniest. That's on Svengoolie this Saturday. If you have MeTV, Svengoolie showing Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein this Saturday.
The nice part is MeTV is almost everywhere, so anybody can pick that up.
Yeah, I love MeTV. So number 6, was that number 6?
Yeah, that was number 6.
7 would be Horror of Dracula with Christopher Lee from 1958, which is Hammer revolutionized horror. It kind of took its cue from Universal, but then it was garish and lurid and all those elements I like because they were European, so they weren't as uptight when it came to censorship, at least when it comes to sex. So Christopher Lee, to me, is, with all due respect to Bela, is the definitive Dracula. I mean, even to this day, and no one has really equaled him. He's just so foreboding and menacing, but also suave, and sinister, and he just to me is the definitive Dracula. I met him once when I was a teenager at some party in Hollywood at a studio, and I just went up to him and I said, "Mr. Lee, I've been a fan of yours," and he was just very gracious and humble and polite, and he scared me just looking up at him. I like craned my neck, but he became. I mean, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing became the greatest horror team besides Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, because they were in Curse of Frankenstein the year before, which really put Hammer on the map as a horror studio, and then Horror Dracula kicked it up another notch, and then The Mummy came out in '59. Christopher Lee played the Mummy, and those big three. In fact, I'm going to watch those three tonight, along with Curse of the Werewolf, which came out in 1960 with not with those two guys, but with Oliver Reed. And then later in the '60s, Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee were together in several Frankenstein and Dracula movies. Not Frankenstein, but in several Dracula movies. Peter Cushing continued as Dr. Frankenstein in a series of Frankenstein films. And Christopher Lee was back in several more Dracula films from Hammer, starting in actually '58. Horror Dracula came out in '58, and then the second one, Dracula Prince of Darkness, didn't come out until '66. And then you had Dracula is Risen from the Grave, and Taste the Blood of Dracula, and Scars of Dracula, and Dracula AD 1972, and a couple more. So, yeah, those two guys are great. But my favorite Hammer film, I think the definitive Hammer film with the definitive Dracula is Horror of Dracula from 1958. So that's definitely number 7.
Yeah, I just watched that again for like the first time in a long time, just a couple years ago on AMC, and that very first scene when Christopher Lee shows how truly feral he is, that still like is unnerving. Like something.
Well, AMC back in the day, I mean, they have great TV shows now. I love Mad Men and The Walking Dead, but their movies kind of suck. They're all edited and they're just random movies. But back around 2000, man, they had Monster Fest, and they would show every AIP flick, every Universal horror flick, every Hammer horror flick, every Toho kaiju flick, all over the course of like 2 weeks. I mean, it was spectacular with no commercials. But I guess people weren't into it, and they didn't have enough viewership, so they added commercials, and then all their movies now are like they keep showing Halloween and Friday the 13th and kind of the next generation of horror. But yeah, back in the day, AMC used to show all that stuff, man. It was awesome.
It was like the rules. Wow, I hate it when that happens. Sorry, the speaker's weird. Like back in the day, they used to show movies that were like the rule was nothing before like 1980, and then it just disappeared.
Now it's nothing, but it's nothing before 1980. Now it seems like
right.
So they don't show anything before 1980. It seems like. But the thing is, we're getting older. I'm 51, so when you say back in the day, you say that to a kid, he's thinking of the 80s, not thinking of the 50s. The 50s might as well be the 20s. So it's all relative, man. So, but I love all the eras for different reasons.
All right, number 8.
I think it's the Awful Dr. Orloff of Jess Franco. That's Jess Franco, famous exploitation filmmaker from Europe. He made probably hundreds of films of varying quality. Most of them sucked, but they're always interesting. He's probably most famous for Vampiros Lesbos from the early '70s, and I love me some lesbian vampire movies. Hammer made a great one called The Vampire Lovers with Ingrid Pitt. They made a few of those.
I've never.
So anyway,
but
The Awful Dr. Orloff came out in 63, 64. I don't know, but it's black and white, so it already looked kind of out of date, but at the same time. It was very forward thinking. It was very revolutionary because it had hints of sex and sensuality that later Jess Franco just went crazy with the sex like everyone else in the '70s and '80s when he could, despite Spanish censorship. He got around that. A lot of those European filmmakers got around it by going through French distributors or other more liberal governments. But anyway. Awful Dr. Orloff came out in like '63, and it just has this again. It goes back to atmosphere. It has this really creepy atmosphere. This really gruesome monster who's this blind kind of Frankenstein type servant of the lead character, and it's kind of a remake of something without a face. What's it called? Not Feet Without a Face. Eyes Without a Face, the French movie, which is very classy. So, it's about a guy trying to, use skin transplants or whatever to revive his wife and stuff, which has been done before, like The Brain That Wouldn't Die, infamously, in other films. But so the plot's not that original, but it's original in terms of how groundbreaking it was in combining sex with horror.
I literally never heard of this movie.
The Awful Dr. Orloff. Yeah, and he made a few more Dr. Orloff movies with Howard Vernon, and then a couple other actors played, I think, Orloff in some other movies. But he made so many movies, it's hard to keep track of it. I mean, the guy was so prolific, Jess Franco. But this was his first big hit. I think it's still his best film, The Awful Dr. Orloff. Really creepy, kind of like period horror noir. And like I said, it's a blend of horror and sexuality. I think was groundbreaking and is quite influential on films from the Grindhouse era, like the 70s and 80s.
I'll have to check that one. That's the only one I haven't seen.
Yeah, you got to check it out.
All right, number 9.
Daughter of Horror.
Okay, you got another one. I've never heard this one either.
It's also known as Dementia, which is its original title.
Oh, okay.
Well, you might know it is from clips of it were shown in The Blob with Steve McQueen. You know the famous movie theater scene in The Blob where the Blob and everyone runs out. The film they're watching is Daughter of Horror, which is actually the alternate title of a film called Dementia, which came out in like '55. And this is literally like a fever dream or a nightmare on film. It's about an hour long. Daughter of Horror, that version is narrated by Ed McMahon, believe it or not. You know, became Johnny Carson's sidekick. Dementia doesn't have any narration, but both versions are highly recommended. It's almost like a lost early David Lynch film with just the imagery of it. It's like I said, it's very much a kind of a horror noir. Definitely blend of those two genres. You could call it either a film noir or a horror film, but it's really both. And it's on video from DVD from Kino, and they have both versions on there. So yeah, it's a fantastic little mood piece. It's got a great little jazz sequence and literally a fever dream captured on film.
All right, and number 10,
Cat People from 1982, the remake. With Nastasha Kinski. I mean, I love the original, the Val Lewton original, but it comes down to really the sex, mix of sex and horror. Because by 1982, those elements were pretty comfortable with each other, as far as audiences was concerned. So Giorgio Moroder, great soundtrack, and a great theme song sung by David Bowie, which Tarantino reused in *Inglourious Basterds*, kind of incongruously, I thought. Beautifully shot. I love the imagery with the cats. I'm a cat daddy myself, so I love cats. And it took kind of the basic storyline of the original from 40, I think it's from 43, and kind of just extrapolated into this meditation on sexuality, and it's got incest, and it's Malcolm McDowell is plays Nastasha Kinski's brother, and they're both basically from this lineage of cat people. And they can only mate with their own. If they mate with anyone else, they turn to a panther. It's ridiculous plot, but really stylish and a great example of early '80s horror.
And it's Paul Schrader, right?
Yeah, Paul Schrader. Yeah, that's right, Paul Schrader, and who wrote Taxi Driver. So. Yeah,
I think I've only ever seen that on television. It was severely edited.
What's funny was I saw it on television in Berkeley in the mid-'80s and on Channel 2, and someone forgot to watch it first because it was unedited on Channel 2 with commercials.
That'd be weird the next day. Sorry, guys.
It was pretty graphic. So those are my top 10 or my top 50, but I mean, I have so many favorites, man. It's hard to pick, but there's 10.
All right, well, you know what? We can do this every Halloween.
That sounds good to me, Michael.
All right, well, thank you for chit-chatting with me about this. Any last plugs, any words?
Nah, man, Thrillville.net. That's got more than you'd ever want to know about me. So just go to Thrillville.net.
All right, that's it, everybody. Check us out on RetroRocketEntertainment.weebly.com. Also on Facebook under the same name. And that's it for us. Have a good night.
Bye.